News! Okay, we'll start with this. Next weekend in Germany, Germany's own unbeaten up-and-comer, Sarah Borman, will be moving up in weight from minimum weight up to light flyweight to take on Mexico's own Jessica Nery-Plata for what are Jessica's WBA and WBC titles.
Set to go down in Sarah's neck of the woods in Germany. Seems that Jessica Nery-Plata will once again be the away fighter, in this instance the traveling champion, against Sarah Borman, who sports a professional record of 17 wins with no losses, no draws, 7 knockouts, an unbeaten fighter.
33 years old to the reigning champion Jessica Nery-Plata, who's 29, several bouts and several rounds more experienced than Sarah, even though Sarah's a few years older.
Even if she doesn't look it.
Which is how Sarah got that nickname, nicknamed Babyface. We can see why. Jessica Nery-Plata, she sports a professional record of 29 wins with 2 losses, no draws, 3 knockouts. But don't let those 3 knockouts fool you. Jessica Nery-Plata is a heavy-handed puncher, at least more heavy-handed than Sarah Borman. Even if Sarah has more recorded knockouts, Jessica has fought better fighters than Sarah, a higher tier, higher caliber of opponents than Sarah has.
Fighters that are harder to knock out.
Jessica's a road warrior. In March of last year, she took on then WBA light flyweight champion Jessica Yolanda Bap, one of the most formidable fighters Argentina has produced in the last decade or so, one of the most formidable champions the division has seen in the last decade or so. And Jessica beat her. She beat her on the road. She followed that up earlier this year in January by taking on then unbeaten Kim Clavel for what was Kim Clavel's WBC title. That was in Kim's neck of the woods. And once again, Jessica came out on top. And now she's traveling to Sarah's neck of the woods to do the same thing, more or less.
To win on the road. This is going to be Jessica's 2nd fight of this year, Sarah's 3rd. Sarah's already seen action 2 times earlier this year, once in May, then again in June.
Both fighters have seen action in the last 12 months. The styles. Both Sarah Borman and Jessica Nery-Plata are mid-range to inside fighters. Now, offensively, Sarah's good, but defensively, she can be caught. Saw that in the Yadira Bustillos fight.
It's the caveat of being a mid-range to inside fighter. You're in line for the other girl's punches.
Sarah Borman, the comparatively longer, lankier fighter of the two, coming in at a slight crouch, inching forward behind that step jab, looking to let punches go mid-range to inside. I think Jessica's counter hooks.
The counter hooks she used on Jessica Bap. The counter hooks she used on Kim Clavel. She's going to use those same counter hooks against Sarah Borman.
I'd wager there's more on Jessica's punches than Sarah's, because Sarah's the one moving up in weight. Sarah's the one moving up from minimum weight up to light flyweight.
A characteristically aggressive, close quarters, volume puncher. Sarah is the kind of fighter that really doesn't change much based on who she's fighting, and she really doesn't change much from one fight to the next. So you can afford to get aggressive with a Yadira Bustillos, for example, but with Jessica Nery-Plata,
it's not a good idea to spend a lot of time in the pocket with Jessica, but that's what Sarah does. That's her sweet spot. Mid-range to inside is where she does her best work, though you will notice that Sarah's hooks are a lot wider than what you get from Jessica. Coming around the side,
upstairs, downstairs, Sarah punches wider than Jessica. Jessica's hooks are more compact, tighter,
harder, and having fought bigger punchers than Sarah Borman, having shared the ring with the likes of Jessica Tuti Bap, who's quite literally one of the hardest punchers the light flyweight division has seen in recent memory. Jessica was able to take her best and keep the punches coming. Thus, Sarah Borman, who's moving up in weight for this fight, I don't think she's going to cause Jessica Nery-Plata to wilt.
I don't think she can overwhelm her with volume the way she overwhelms those girls down there at minimum weight. This is light flyweight, and this is Jessica Nery-Plata,
who was too strong for Jessica Bap in the pocket, too strong for Kim Clavel in the pocket. I think she's going to be too strong for Sarah Borman in the pocket. If Sarah means to fight her there, then she's doing half the work for Jessica, because then Jessica doesn't have to find her.
That was Kim Clavel's mistake when she fought Jessica.
Being the somewhat faster fighter, though not the bigger puncher, Kim spent too much time in the pocket with Jessica and was getting banged up in between the shots, in between the punches. She was getting caught with counter hooks that were busting her up, and I'm afraid that Sarah Borman is about to experience the exact same thing.
Jessica may only have 3 recorded knockouts in 31 professional bouts, but I say it all the time, there's more to boxing than what you see on paper, and if you've seen Jessica in action, you'll know she's got heavy hands and great counter hooks.
Thus, the edge in power goes to the champion, speed goes to the challenger, durability back to the champion, back over to Jessica Nery-Plata, who's fought bigger punchers than Sarah Borman. She's fought one of the biggest punchers the light flyweight division has seen in recent memory, and she didn't wilt.
Jessica took the shots and kept the punches coming, thus I don't think Sarah can beat Jessica at her own game.
The only drawback I see is that Jessica's not a strong finisher. That's why she doesn't bank very many knockouts. So this fight may have a similar aesthetic to the Kim Clavel fight, where Jessica is getting off those counters and, in effect, landing the more eye-catching punches. There will be a difference when Sarah lands a punch as opposed to Jessica. I'm going with Jessica Nery-Plata to win a points decision on the road next weekend in Germany. Look for this on DAZN. In other news, it was announced earlier today that it's official, and moving forward, the people at the PBC are in fact going to be working with Amazon Prime. The official press release reads, New York, December 7th, 2023, today Prime Video and PBC announce a landmark multi-year rights agreement to deliver viewers the boxing industry's most significant events, providing fans with year-round access to the best matchups featuring the biggest stars in boxing. PBC features over 150 active fighters across various weight divisions, including top contenders and current world champions since its debut in 2015. PBC has presented the biggest mega events in the sport of boxing, including 2023 blockbusters David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant, Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia, Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford, and Canelo Alvarez versus Jermell Charlo. The addition of the world-class sports property like PBC is another one of the many benefits that come with Prime, which provides unparalleled savings, convenience, and entertainment all in a single membership. Prime Video will distribute PBC's industry-leading pay-per-view events in the United States, with the first ever event anticipated in March of next year. PBC pay-per-view fights will be available for all viewers to purchase.
March. What happened to those 3 fight dates set aside in January and February?
My previous videos, we talked about how TGB Promotions, which is just another way of saying PBC Promotions, had penciled in 3 fight dates, 1 in January and 2 in February, that were supposed to be pay-per-view shows. If the first card of the deal is all the way out there in March, does that then mean that the PBC won't be doing any shows in the months of January or February? Where does that leave those fight dates they had set aside?
The press release states that it's a multi-year deal. How many cards are they going to be doing in a single calendar year?
And per their official press release, they look to be doing in between 12 to 14 shows in the coming calendar year, which is noticeably less than what they were doing before. In previous years, you have to remember that before, you were getting PBC shows on Fox, you were getting PBC shows on Showtime, comprehensive schedules by way of 2 major platforms. Now, it's just one, and they have a lot of fighters to accommodate, so you can expect them to trim the fat. It was adequately described by fellow content creator Quentin D. Lilly, who stated, I wonder how much of the PBC stable gets retained with only 14 shows being guaranteed. Canelo, Tank, Zoo, the Charlos, Benavidez, Boots, Spence, Morrell, Fulton. That's about all I can see getting a major push with this deal. Everybody else better find a home.
Some have already started. In my previous video, I talked about how Jason Rosario, former unified champion and a guy you used to see on PBC shows, he boxed on a small hall show very recently. Former unified junior middleweight champion Jarrett Hurd, he's set to do the same thing very soon. And former WBC champion Mark Magsayo, he's fighting in a small hall show.
They say that the PBC hosts a stable of approximately 150 fighters, but of that 150, how many of them are actually going to get to box on the Amazon platform? How many of them can they actually accommodate? His fellow content creator Quentin D. Lilly further queried, it looks like they'll be cutting a lot of their stable moving forward. 12 to 14 shows, 6 bouts per show. If every fighter gets 2 fights per year, that's only enough room for about 30 fighters.
And the math checks out. If we're talking about shows that only have 6 bouts per show, I anticipate given the scarcity of fight dates, they're going to jam-pack these cards with a lot, and I mean a lot, of undercard fights, prelim bouts.
That might be their only way of getting some of these fighters fight dates. And you also have to remember that some of these fighters take priority over others, like Canelo, like Gervonta Davis, so on and so forth. It looks like they're not going to be able to accommodate everyone. A Twitter user that goes by the name The Face of Boxing says, the PBC inflated the market. Fighters' purses to suffocate competition, other promoters, only to release those same fighters a few years later because, quote-unquote, the market is changing. No, the market was never supposed to pay the likes of a Caleb Plant $10 million to fight Canelo.
Detailing what we often talk about here on the channel, that over the years, mistakes were made. Several mistakes that led them to where they are now, where now you don't have a choice. You have to trim the fat, but if you would have been doing that the whole time, things might have been different.
If they're only doing about 12 to 14 shows annually, as opposed to how many shows they were doing before, back when they were in bed with both Fox and Showtime, then they are now operating at a deficit.
They don't have as many fight dates as they used to, and they don't have as much money to play, as much money to pay.
Now, I've often said that Al Heyman jumping into bed with two broadcasters instead of just one might have seemed like a good idea at first, but all he really did in doing so, doing business with Fox and doing business with Showtime, all that led to was Al Heyman spreading the stable thin. Now, you're just putting up piss-poor numbers on two platforms instead of just one, where if you had prioritized one and making the best fights possible to deliver the best numbers possible,
things might have been different. The way it all worked out, both platforms ended up leaving the sport of boxing. That essentially means you failed on both fronts. You failed on both platforms.
What do you think? Do you think that Fox left the sport of boxing because of how great the numbers were, or Showtime? No broadcaster is gonna cut programming that's bringing them eyes and bringing them subscribers. The reason they were cut is because they weren't.
So now they're on Amazon with less fight dates and less money to play overall.
With 12 to 14 fight dates, some of them are said to be non-pay-per-view shows, shows that won't be hidden behind a paywall, but how many of them?
What are you getting at?
That the deal is not as sweet as it sounds, and that they're not now in a better position than they were before. That if they would have did things a little bit differently back when times were better, they'd be in a better position here today. When you see celebrating PBC jumping into bed with Amazon Prime doesn't understand the nature of the situation, or that they have less to work with now. To the consumer, it's certainly not cause for celebration, because all it really means is that instead of giving your money to Showtime for those pay-per-views, you will now be giving it to Amazon, heralding the continued division of the sport and its fragmented nature, which is leading to a lot of fights not happening, a lot of problems, and a lot of politics.
It's not an improvement.
The situation is no better now than it was before. It might actually be worse. Worse for the fans, worse for the fighters, worse for the sport. The continued division and fragmentation of boxing has not been conducive towards the growth of the boxing market in the American landscape.
Globally, the sport is growing. Globally, but domestically, here in America, the market is shrinking.
Why? It all starts in circa 2013-2014, upon the inception of the PBC, back when they had all that Waddle and Reed money. A lot of fighters...
They were being overpaid.
The fighters that Richard Schaefer and Al Heyman convinced to leave Golden Boy for the PBC years ago likely did so due to the promise of big cash.
The Waddle and Reed money.
I believe that the initial investment was somewhere in the neighborhood of over $900 million, and after just 3 years, Al Heyman had lost in excess of $600 million. Just 3 years into the deal. In layman's terms, didn't take long for that money to dry up, but by the time that it did, a lot of fighters were expecting a lot of money every time they get out there, whether or not it reflected their actual market value or not. Needless to say, that it didn't. The PBC survives, continuing to slug along, Extending their existing deal with Showtime and inking a new landmark deal with Fox, you had a lot of fighters whose financial demands they sought to satisfy by putting their fights behind a paywall, billing them as box office fights even though they weren't box office worthy. The metrics that these fights brought in did not satisfy what the broadcasters wanted.
And that's why both Showtime and Fox ended up leaving boxing. What could they have done differently?
Crack the fucking whip. You can't turn all these guys into box office stars and pay-per-view attractions. Back in 2018, when Danny Garcia was offered a Terrence Crawford fight on the top-ranked side of things, you should have let him take it. Send him over there. If he wins, he comes back a hero, and if he loses, you get to trim the fat. You were paying Danny Garcia upwards of $1 million a fight to fight guys like Ivan Redkach and Adrian Granados at a time when Top Rank is willing to take him off your hands, pay him $3 million and a portion of the pay-per-view upside, and instead of letting him just go over there and try his luck, you keep him on your side of things to gain what?
What was the return on those fights? What, you give Danny $1 million and Ivan $300,000, you give Danny $1 million and Adrian $400,000. Look at the spending.
Look at the spending, and then look at the metrics. What's the return on that? What's been the return on spending so much money on Danny fucking Garcia? And don't bring up the Spence fight that he had in late 2020, that pay-per-view, because that didn't sell anything. You spent between $3 and $4 million on Garcia versus Redkach and Garcia versus Granados when you could have sent him over to Top Rank and let him be their problem. Meanwhile, you used the money you saved to make a bigger fight, a better fight on your side of things with your own guys.
Mistakes were made. So many mistakes were made. That's just one example.
With so many fighters that you wasted so much money on and so much time, you failed to deliver desired metrics to your broadcasters, which resulted in you getting the boot. You say that, well, they've got this new Amazon deal, yeah, and as a result, they have less fight dates than they did before. The more of these networks that give you the boot after having given you a budget, the less attractive boxing becomes as an investment to broadcasters, from you carrying all that dead weight and protecting what you thought were assets.
You should have let nature run its course.
You didn't want to do things the hard way. You should have let natural selection do it for you. Outsource some of those guys because you can't protect them all. In the long run, it's going to cost you. And it has. Millions.
The broadcasters, I should say, dumb enough to trust Al Heyman's judgment.
And now you're at Amazon with less fight dates. Congratulations.